Yeah, so I'm not trying to do both, and now I'll make a start. Thank you. So I was just saying, welcome everyone, and hello to our session tonight. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely Wednesday evening. Our session tonight is around an introduction to keeping people safe in voluntary and community settings. I'll just let them come in. We are, myself and Tricia, we are AIRVAS's safeguarding offer. So between us, we cover adults and children safeguarding. We are going to be looking at a whole range of safeguarding issues that affect children and young people and adults right across the East Riding. You are right there, Tricia. And this is just an introduction. Safeguarding is... Feel free to put yourself on mute for now if you want, but I will get you to unmute yourselves later, just to either join in with a bit of a discussion, or you can write it in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that. So as I was saying, it is an introduction to safeguarding, and we are going to cover a whole range of topics. It will feel a little bit like a whistle-stop tour, as in we will be covering lots of different things quite briefly. What I would say is, if there is anything in particular that we cover that you feel that you would like, or your organisation would like to know more about, and maybe a little bit more of a bespoke, in-depth either training session or workshop, then what I'm going to do is, once everybody's in, I'm going to pop my email address in the chat, and please feel free to get in touch if there's any further kind of support, either in relation to safeguarding, or the other aspect of my role is domestic abuse, which we'll talk through our roles in a minute. So if there's anything on either of those topics that you feel that your group, your members, your trustees would benefit from a little bit more work, then please get in touch, and I will make contact with you and come and see how we can support you. Please feel free to have your pens and paper ready. We're probably going to cover a lot, and you may have some questions, but we will provide opportunity at the end to have a little bit of a discussion for anybody who wants to hang around. Or like I say, feel free to, if you'd rather message me via email, you can feel free to get in touch that way. So yes, what I'll do is I will now hand you over to Tricia. So I'll keep an eye on the people entering, Tricia, and Tricia's going to share our presentation with you. And yeah, I'll hand you over to Tricia.
Thank you, Gemma. I think, let me know if you can see, everybody can, does the PowerPoint come up?
It is, yes, now, Tricia,
yeah.
It is.
Okay.
Although it's on activity. Oh, you're going to do it.
Right. Good evening, everybody. As Gemma said, thank you very much for joining us on a Wednesday evening. I know the weather's been awful today as well, hasn't it? So but the last thing people want to do is maybe go on to some training. So it's nice for everybody to join us, and it's actually a really good turnout as well, which I'm sure Gemma will be happy about as well. So just a very brief introduction to myself. I'm the Safeguarding Adults Development Officer, working closely with AIRVAS and the AirSAB team, and predominantly it's adult safeguarding that we're talking about tonight, but we both feel that children's safeguarding sort of maps across, and also the domestic abuse part that Gemma's role covers. It's really, really important, because a lot of people think about domestic abuse and safeguarding predominantly being around children, when in actual fact, you know, there's a lot of adults that can be at risk of harm and abuse as well. So I think hopefully you'll find it, you know, very informative. The idea tonight, as Gemma said already, is to give you an overview. It's not a full session. A full training for safeguarding adults to gain a level 1 certificate is a 3-hour course, and it can be done online, either through AIRVAS or through the AirSAB team, but we can give you that information at the end of the PowerPoint. But if you're within the voluntary sector and you're working within the community and working within different groups, or you've set up your own group, Gemma and I have tried to take the scary bit out of safeguarding. And a lot of people have said that they just want to know, have like a brief overview of it. And hopefully tonight we've gone into a lot more detail than just an overview, but I think it is really useful, especially if you may be working within a group, within a community setting yourself, and you haven't maybe got your policies and procedures sort of in line yet. Okay. So the aims of the session tonight is to provide introduction to adopting safer cultures within voluntary and community settings, identifying and recognising abuse, understanding what safeguarding is and how we can protect children, young people and adults. Going to look briefly at safer recruitment, which is really important in this day and age, that whether it's a small group or you're working with an employer, that you've got your safer recruitment policies and procedures in place as well. Where can you get help if you suspect someone is being abused, and how to manage allegations within your setting. So just before we go into the PowerPoint, we'd like you to be present for the whole session. Obviously, if you've got to go, please don't worry. We do understand, especially if you've got young children. And the best one in the world, you're on a training session, something could happen over the next 2 hours. It's out of your control, but just pop it in the chat for us. So let us know if you do actually leave. Please have your camera switched on where possible. If you feel more comfortable with your camera off, that's absolutely fine. It's not a mandatory thing that you have your camera on, it's entirely up to you. Feel free to interact and participate. You can use the hands button in chat function. Hopefully you all know how to do it. It's just at the bottom of the screen. Gemma might be able to explain it a bit better than me. So you just click on it and the little hand will go up. If you've got a mobile phone with you, that's absolutely fine. But if you don't mind having it on silent, just so that it doesn't interfere while we're going through and talking. Allow others to contribute. So if we ask you any questions or we have a discussion, it's obviously out of politeness really to make sure that everybody gets a chance to have their say. Confidentiality and disclosure is something we do sort of like point out to you, because we have to make sure. It could be if you're working within an agency setting, or you've had a dealings with a client, we don't use names, and your venues and agencies should remain anonymised. So we wouldn't sort of like name anybody while we're on this training for the time being. Again, if anything comes up and you might feel that you've got a concern yourself, try not to sort of blurt that out to Gemma and I during while everybody's on. But as Gemma said earlier, please feel free to stay on at the end of the session, and we're more than happy to help or point you in the right direction. If there's a genuine concern that's maybe come up that's given you food for thought during the PowerPoint. We've decided probably not to have a break, because we sort of said earlier, if we go through the PowerPoint, I'm sure it could be up to 2 hours. It might finish up a little bit earlier, so we thought that might be better. If any of you get to the point where you need a quick break, again, just pop your hand up or pop it in the chat and we'll go from there. Thank you. So straight into safeguarding and what it is. So safeguarding is everybody's business. Training is non-agency specific. Your principles apply to organisational and community settings. We all have a duty of care. So again, as we said earlier, whether you're working for an organisation or you're working within the community, or even if you're part of a community and you've got a concern or you spot something, it's all of our responsibility to sort of be vigilant, really. We do have a new little bit in your care as well now. It's duty of candour, and all candour means is being honest and talking openly. So if an issue does arise, a safeguarding concern, that people can be frank and they can talk openly about it if they're reporting something or they need some feedback from the person they've reported it to. We all work to a code of conduct, and doing nothing is not an option. So all that's saying is, if there's anything at all and you think, should I or shouldn't I, it's always best to probably share it. And I think to take the fear factor out of sort of people worry about reporting safeguarding, there's lots of phone lines that will give you at the end of the PowerPoint that you can talk to somebody in confidence without it going further. And it could be that somebody is struggling financially, emotionally. They could put somebody in contact, down a different route, if that makes sense. So if it's a concern and you feel that you're not sure, it's always best to sort of have a chat with somebody. Gemma's here as well, which is really good on myself, that at the other end of the phone with Eva, she can actually give us a quick call and we can say, well, yeah, it could be or it might not be. So you've just got somebody else to talk to, really. So what is adult safeguarding and why does it matter? So we are protecting adults' rights to live in safety, free from abuse. People and organisations working together to prevent abuse. We're promoting the adult's wellbeing as set out in the Care Act. We have to regard to the adult's views, wishes, feelings and beliefs on deciding any action. So a lot of things have changed where it's more person-centred within the adults sort of like safeguarding sort of situations now, where people will be asked, what their wishes are and what their feelings are. It's not just sort of taken care of for them. And we're raising public awareness and providing information. The biggest one that some of you may be aware of, or you might have read already, is the Care Act 2014, which is full statutory guidance. It's a big document, but it is very important if you're working within an organisation that you may be seeing sight of that, or within the community setting that you may be just aware of it. Your key legislation and guidance, I'm not going to go through all of them on there, but we'll send these slides to you afterwards. If you just want to have a little look at this slide, it's just talking you through what legislation and guidance is available for you. So you have the Care Act 2014. There's the Making Safeguarding Personal Guide. These are all available online. There's the Mental Capacity Act 2005-2019. You have Code of Practice, DOLS under review, April 2023. That's under review because it's having its name changed. There's a few appendixes going into that one. We all right? Can we mute? You have the Human Rights Act as well.
No, I tell you, she know what it is. Hello?
Hello? Sorry, can somebody just put the thing on mute? Can we mute everybody, Gemma? All right. The Health and Social Care Act regulations, sorry, and the fundamental standards, which is the CQC. So if any of you are working within a care home setting, if you are domiciliary care, you will all be aware of the CQC. If you're working within a hospital environment as well for the NHS. And all of those will cover person-centred care,
Tricia, if you just unmute yourself, sorry, it's muted you as well. Apologies, it's because it'll only let me mute everybody.
Sorry. Okay, yeah. But,
sorry, if you just start this slide, it was just a minute. Thank you.
We have 6 key principles in adult safeguarding. The first one is empowerment. Second one is prevention. Third one is proportionality. Fourth is protection. 5 is working in partnership. And 6 is accountability. So having that accountability for yourselves and also making sure that people are accountable for how the situation would be dealt with. Okay. So summary of safeguarding protection, we have just in the middle there, I've just tried to do it sort of like a more simplified slide. We've got ERSAB, if anybody wants to write that down, it's East Riding Safeguarding Adults Board. If we're not aware of it already, I'm sure most of you will be. And we have just surrounding the Adult Safeguarding Board is the UK law. We have the police. We work with the local authorities, CQC, which we've talked about, which is a little bit like if you've been in education, you have Ofsted. For the care sector, you have CQC that look after everybody. We have the care providers, and then we have the public adults at risk and the relatives. So everybody in that little circle is normally who would be involved if there was a serious incident of safeguarding. So it's just a little slide that I thought would be easy just for everybody to understand, you know, who sort of what everybody stands for, really. Okay. So we're going to go into the types of abuse, and then Gemma's going to do a good activity with everybody. Any or all types of abuse may be perpetrated as a result of deliberate negligence or ignorance. Make sure your actions or omissions do not harm an individual's health or well-being. Okay, and then we're going to go into the activity. I'll pass over to Gemma.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tricia. If everyone can just make sure that they have got mute on just for the moment. It's hard for me to not mute us at the same time. But yeah, so we're going to do a little bit of an activity now, which is getting us to think about the 10 recognised forms of abuse and how many we might be able to think of between us. So if you are happy to, I would like you just to jot some in the chat. I'll give you a few minutes to think about it, to scribble down some notes. So don't feel the need to rush. I will give everybody a few minutes. But if you can think of any forms of abuse, and let's see how many we can get together between us, and then we'll look at the 10 recognised forms. We've already got some in there. So yeah, in the chat is perfect. Yeah, we've got mental. Oh, you're going quicker than I thought. Yes, mental and emotional, brilliant. Physical, neglect. Verbal, yes. Children, yes, and definitely substance misuse. Doing really well here, thank you. I was worried nobody was going to speak to me, so I'm really glad you are. Bullying, yes. Organisational, good one, Peggy. Yep, financial, you really don't need very long for this activity, do you? You're all doing amazing, thank you. So yes, I think we have covered most. There's one, let me think, two, I'm just going skimming through now. I know you might have actually said them, nearly all of them, I think. Let's have a look, let me just minimize this. So, sexual, cultural, yeah, I can see them coming in now. Financial, brilliant, yes. Self-neglect, a really good one. Yes. So, Tricia, if you want to, don't mind putting us over onto the next slide, it's going to show us all 10 forms of recognised abuse. And I think, to be fair, between you all, you covered all of them. You've got your physical, you've got your domestic abuse, you've got the sexual, you've got your psychological and emotional, you have your financial, your organisational, oh, maybe we did miss one, the modern day slavery, and discrimination, and then we've got neglect and self-neglect. So what I'm going to do now is quickly, well, I say quickly, I'm going to briefly discuss each one to look at examples and some of the kind of signs and symptoms of these abuse, which is prevalent within adult safeguarding. So if Tricia doesn't mind putting on to the next slide, we're going to look at physical abuse. You might have to give it a few clicks, Tricia, and it'll bring up the full list. So we've got some really good examples here of forms of physical abuse. And some of them, I won't read through them all, but they give you examples of things such as, you know, not giving somebody adequate food or drink, a misuse of medication, restraints and rough handling. Some of your physical forms of abuse that, you know, would be more likely to come to mind, such as your slapping, your kicking, your pinching, your scratching, your pulling hair, and even other ones, including leaving people in wet or soiled clothes, you know, whether that person has additional kind of care needs that would require that attention. And so one of the bottom ones is a really good one, and it's about kind of not engaging people, you know, that passive or aggressive behaviour and that fear, and the physical impact on the body for that. So you've got things like your eye contact and how those things might be recognised in the person. So there we've got changes in weight, changes in how their appearance or their behaviour, you know, signs of malnutrition, dehydration and pressure ulcers. And then our next form of abuse, if you don't mind sliding over, is financial or material abuse. And again, you've got a list there of ways in which a person may be financially or materially abused. So you've got things including theft, which would be taking money, property, etc. Fraud, so maybe they're having somebody, you know, sign something in somebody else's name or in some way using their identity in order to benefit, maybe financially. Exploitation, particularly if you've got an adult with additional care needs, that makes them more vulnerable to maybe agreeing to things that they may not normally agree to. And pressure in connection with wills and property inheritance and financial transactions. So again, we're looking at ways in which these are more vulnerable people, you know, adults, may be affected if they are kind of taken advantage of. Another big one we're seeing a lot at the minute is in relations to kind of your cybercrime, and scamming. And again, you know, it's we're seeing it more and more with adults. Scams and cybercrime is becoming more and more kind of clever and complex, and is really affecting those that are being targeted. So examples of how we might see this is maybe putting bank accounts into joint names, withdrawing large amounts of transactions, again, reward points being retained by workers, and where they're unable to pay for bills or money going missing, apologies, you know, they may be drawing out large amounts of money, but then later questioning maybe where that's gone or where it's been spent. And that may be because their memory is affected by you know, agreements made around how the money is being spent. And if you move on to the next one, please, Tricia. Another one here we've got is the sexual abuse, which again can be, you know, it doesn't have to be just contact, it can be non-contact as well. So you've got harassment and inappropriate looking, touching, you know, things saying inappropriate verbal comments would still come under sexual abuse and harassment. You've got inflicting pornography or forcing somebody to watch it, where an adult may be forced or coerced into sex, and that may be via physical means or emotional blackmail. And grooming of individuals, female genital mutilation, and female, which is female, you know, the female circumcision, and it comes under the Female Circumcision Acts of 1985. So signs and symptoms that may be, you know, indicative of some form of sexual abuse, maybe things like bruising on inner thighs, frequent infections, difficulty walking or sitting, pregnancy, behavioural changes, low mood, not wanting people to assist with personal care, and again, more behavioural things such as fearful, angry, or maybe overt sexualised behaviour. And the next one, please, Tricia. Oh, if we just go back one, I think it's jumped one. Oh, thank you. So now we're going to look at psychological or emotional abuse. And, you know, what signs and symptoms of that within adults can include things like emotional blackmail, particularly, again, we've got a key theme here of threatening pets, control and humiliation, you know, fear being used to force somebody to make them feel that they have to do something or behave in a certain way. Denying access to services, again, if you've got an adult that may be relying on others to get them to, you know, GP appointments, health appointments, picking prescriptions up, things like that. You've got a situation where they are relying on that person. If they're not, then they're not, you know, not meeting with that need. You've got verbal abuse and the impact of things like shouting, swearing, name calling, inappropriate nicknames. You know, and you might see things there where people are belittling or verbally abusing in a way that's kind of almost like taking the mick or degrading them in some way because of maybe something that is a vulnerability, or that may be something that they struggle with or find difficult. Withholding information, so maybe somebody's only being given part of information. It may be something to do with, for example, something financial, and they're not being given the, you know, the full details of why they're signing something, things like this. And then forced isolation and withdrawal from support. So if somebody is trying to inflict a level of control, and particularly kind of psychological and emotional control, what they may do is try and isolate that person from those around them who would maybe intervene or question the behaviour. And ways in which we might identify psychological or emotional abuse, you know, is somebody appearing quite frightened, maybe they're quite reluctant to be alone, particularly with that alleged perpetrator. Do they tend to come across as quite intimidated? Do they acknowledge that they're maybe a little bit isolated? Maybe they're, you know, saying they're not seeing their friends and family anymore, or not attending the local community groups maybe that they would attend. Just things like that would suggest that maybe not, something's out of the ordinary and they're not quite appearing themselves. And other things that may come under this is, you know, loss of appetite or maybe too much sleep. And then the next one, please, Tricia. And again, next we've got organisational abuse. So here we're looking at abuse when it's in relation to an organisation, and for many adults that may be one that they attend, you know, or maybe they even, you know, are a resident within that organisation. So examples of organisational abuse there, as you can see, is, you know, no opportunity for snacks or drinks when required. So if you've got an organisation that will only serve things at this time, or will only maybe try and limit what somebody's having because they're concerned that they may need to go to the toilet more or do more things, then you've got to look at whether there is kind of like an organisational abuse being present here. Again, you've got things around misuse of medication, again for personal use or suppressing behaviour. Set times for going to bed and getting up, having meals, etc. is just what I referred to. And, you know, if there's no complaints procedure, so if somebody within an organisation isn't clear about if they're not unhappy with something, how they do report that, then again, you know, you've got to look and question whether there may be some form of organisational abuse being present. Some of the ways in which you might identify and recognise organisational abuse is things like mentioned at the bottom below. So things like a lack of choice. If you've got somebody saying, well, I have to do that this time and I don't have a choice with this. You know, if you've got people who are saying that they feel quite isolated, or they're apparently, you know, they're appearing that they've got really low self-esteem. They may be, you know, you may have opposite ends of the spectrum. You could have somebody who's really withdrawn and pulling away and being quite isolated. And the opposite end of the spectrum may be somebody who is maybe more angry or, you know, openly unhappy about their situation. Other things include poor appetite. And maybe within an organisation, you may have a resident who finds that they're actually dressed in somebody else's clothing. And the next one, please, Tricia. And the next form of abuse we've got is discriminatory abuse. I won't read too much through it. And as mentioned, there is the Equality Act 2010 there. But what would come under that is things listed such as not being given the appropriate medical treatment, and, you know, not receiving some sort of support or service because of grounds of age, disability, gender, reassignment, marriage. Again, there's a few listed there. So again, we've got that aspect of isolation. So maybe they're being discouraged or outright not allowed to participate because of different language issues, cultural, and again being made fun of. And that also ties in next one with the last bullet point, which is about maybe being left out or not included in things, you know, and provisions not being made to make that person feel fully part of that group and able to contribute. And at the bottom is examples of how that behaviour, you know, might impact on somebody and might be indicative in their behaviour. So being withdrawn, fearful, quiet, you know, angry, accepting, you know, a loss of self-esteem, which ultimately any form of, you know, discrimination is going to make somebody feel that way. And the next one, please, Tricia. And here we have neglect and acts of omission. So again, these ones are referring to that failure to meet with somebody's needs, and also a delay in acting to sort of meet with their needs. So we've got some examples there that include, you know, failure to meet with their maintain skills and knowledge. Again, living in an environment which is dirty and unhygienic, withholding essentials such as medication, adequate nutrition and heating. And we've got links again for more that you could, if you want to do some further reading around the Mental Capacity Act and, you know, criminalising that offence of ill treatment and willful neglect. And also again below there's the criminal justice one. And again, we'll see them kind of indicators, which would include, you know, weight loss. So if you've got somebody who's not eating properly and, you know, they're either not being provided with the nutrition that they need, or maybe the types of food that they need, you're going to see that in their malnutrition and weight loss, and ultimately their health is going to become affected. Pressure sores, you know, and they may present as angry or frustrated, or the opposite may be that they've kind of a bit of defeat and they've resigned that is just how they're going to have to live, because they're maybe dependent on that person who's caring for them. And again, it's going to result in that increased poor health, but also mental health as well. And, you know, as put in the bottom there, ultimately, if left, you know, can result in death. And the next one, please, Tricia. Again, we've put in here neglect with linking in with neglect, sorry, is self-neglect. So this is where maybe somebody's lifestyle choices or their behavior that they've chosen is maybe not quite meeting with their needs. So, you know, we've got things here like neglecting to care for oneself, not caring for their pets. And again, you've got, you know, examples could be the urine or feces of the animal or the pets within maybe their home. Not taking medication or attending appointments, so ultimately they are going to start impacting on their own health. Falling asleep while smoking and the risk of fire that comes alongside with that. Hoarding, again, you know, it's that one step further, shall we say, maybe where hoarding becomes a danger, particularly if it's restricting access to and from a property in an emergency. And we've made reference there to the VAM, which is where you can refer a vulnerable adult that you are concerned about, where their kind of care and support needs and their ability to protect themselves is maybe a concern. So there is more information on that within the Ish Riding website as well. And the impact of self-neglect can include things like increased physical and mental health, mental ill health, apologies. So, you know, physically seeing that somebody is not appearing well and maybe neglecting their own physical health. Naturally, their mental health is likely to be impacted in the process. You've got things in there like risk of being evicted. If you've got a resident within a property that's really failing to upkeep with that property, you know, and not look after it and cause, you know, trouble for neighbours, then you've got the issue of them possibly being at risk of eviction. Weight loss and pressure sores again are there, and you've got the painful gums and teeth if they're neglecting their dental health, and alcohol and drug misuse problems, which you can often find is it becomes a little bit of a coping mechanism, but can also obviously increase the risks to that person. And the next one, please, Tricia. And again, we've got another form of abuse here, which is modern slavery. We've got a list there of some of the kind of factors that would come under that. But some of the things do include, you know, human trafficking, and where, you know, people are forced into labour in what it would be considered not appropriate and not, you know, appropriate forms of work. So they may be being coerced or forced into engaging in that role, or also coerced or forced into taking drugs, or also into having sex with other people. And again, we've put in there about inhumane treatment, you know, living in conditions that are not appropriate to be lived in, and not under, you know, the normal pretense of being there. Then maybe they're under the pretense of being in a very different situation. Oh, sorry, Felicia, can you not hear me? Is everybody struggling to hear me? Let me know just before I continue.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Oh, thank you very much. If you're still struggling, Felicia,
I can hear you, bro.
Oh, thank you. As well, as long as you can hear me, thank you. And yeah, we've got the Modern Slavery Act there from 2015. Oh, I'm glad everyone can hear. Thank you for that. And the next slide, please, Tricia. Another form is domestic abuse. Now, I have put on there the legal definition, which did recently change as a result of the Domestic Abuse Act 2021. And essentially what the behaviour is, oh, thank you, Yolanda. Essentially what the definition recognises is that it's the behaviour between two people would be classified as domestic abuse. You've got person A and person B. If A and B are both aged 16 or over, so the new legal definition recognises that it does impact those 16 and over and not just 18 and over, and that they are personally connected to each other, whether that is a relationship or familial within the family, and that the behaviour is abusive. Now, we recognise a behaviour to being abusive if it consists of any of the following forms of abuse. So you've got there physical or sexual abuse, which we've just looked at, violent or threatening behaviour, controlling or coercive behaviour, which we'll look at the minute, and also economic abuse and psychological and emotional. So physical and sexual we have looked at. Violent and threatening behaviour essentially comes into issues around power and control and kind of persuading somebody or controlling the way a person behaves through that threat or the violence itself. Controlling and coercive behaviour, which is a pattern of behaviours which aim to control and intimidate a person, again, either into doing or behaving in a certain way, but also quite often what you see with coercive behaviour is more how it prevents somebody being able to do something. So by not being able to go out or by not being able to spend their own money, or, you know, and what you see is it's a gradual kind of process by which a person is coercively controlled by another. You've got economic abuse, which is now included in the new definition, and that includes the financial aspects of abuse, which we did look at earlier. And then you've got your psychological and emotional, which again is your kind of emotional, psychological, kind of the verbal, the impact on a person, and particularly on their mental health and their mental well-being. And again, we've got there the new offence of controlling and coercive behaviour, which is coming into and we are seeing more and more examples of that, where that is being, you know, taken to the point of, you know, conviction. We've also included in the domestic abuse, there is reference to the honour-based violence and forced marriage, and things such as the Declares Law scheme, which for anybody who's not heard of that before, is the capacity, if a person does become concerned about somebody they are in a relationship with, so they do have to be in a relationship with that person, there is the capacity to request intelligence on a person, if, and more specifically in relation to have they been known criminally to be a perpetrator of domestic abuse. And again, we've got the Domestic Abuse Act 2021, which there is lots of information on that. And, you know, domestic abuse is a very big topic in itself. But if it is of interest to your organisation or agency to learn more about that, please get in touch. I will add as soon as it's Tricia's talking, I will put my email address in there. So now I will pass it, it's very timely, I will pass you back to Tricia, who is going to do a bit of a case study activity with you.
Can you hear me? Sorry, can you hear me okay? We're just going to go through a couple of case studies just to reiterate what Gemma's just gone through with the 10 types of abuse, just to see if we can recognise them If you'd like to just pop in the chat box for Gemma to pick up as we're going through, what sort of types of abuse do we think the case study is sort of covering? So we've got case study 1, which is Mary. Mary uses a wheelchair and is dependent on her sister Sue to take her shopping and help her wash and dress. Due to her care and support needs, Mary feels unable to complain when Sue uses Mary's money for her own shopping and to buy clothes. This leaves Mary short of money and unable to buy treats. Sue tells Mary that she would have to go in a home without her help. What forms of abuse could Mary be experiencing? If you'd like to add your answers into the chat box, and if Gemma doesn't mind telling me what's in the chat box, because I can't. Can I pick it up now? Yeah, financial, well done. Can we think of any others? Yeah, well done. Yeah, we've got emotional, we've got it is like a form of neglect, psychological and emotional. Yeah, so well done. Possibly coercive as well, actually, if a sister's sort of trying to sort of talk her into saying, isn't she, that if she doesn't look after her, then she's going to have to go into her home, which would be quite frightening for somebody, you know, if they're worrying about that. We've got physical and mental as well. As Gemma said earlier, most forms of abuse will have an impact on somebody's physical and mental well-being. So well done, you've done it all done really well on that one.
We have just got one hand up there, Tricia. Did you manage to answer that?
Can you click on the hand, Gemma? I haven't got the hand on my screen for some reason.
You want me to pick them up? You want to play down?
Sorry, is it a Huber? Did you have your hand up? Did you manage to speak? Sorry. Yeah. Oh, you've sent it in the chat. Brilliant. Thanks ever so much. I didn't want it to move on without you. Thank you. I'll get to know your hand.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just didn't want to move on.
Thanks, Gemma. And we've got case study 2, which is Joan. Joan is a 75-year-old woman with capacity but reduced mobility. She drinks a large amount of alcohol each day and spends most of her time in bed, refusing to let her carers help her wash or shower. What forms of abuse could Joan be experiencing? And if you'd just like to add your answers into the chat box, that would be great. Yep, self-neglect, well done. Yeah, picking up on the self-neglect, excellent. Yes, yeah. Yeah, could be if she's drinking large amounts of alcohol as well. Is it hiding something else? Possibly it could be to do with mental health, couldn't it? But predominantly self-neglect. And again, when we talk about safeguarding, Joan is at risk, isn't she? But it could be that the safeguarding support that gets put in place for Joan would be to sort of seek somebody that can assist or help with the actual alcohol side of things, really, to try and sort of help her get better with that. So well done on that one.
Yeah, they said there about depression and mental health. Thank you, Michael. And Sarah also said self-neglect, mental health and alcohol issues and low self-esteem, which, yes, you're all absolutely right. She's got a lot of complex needs there, yeah, that require some support.
I think as well, when you look at the case studies, it's probably good to pick up on the fact that it is very complex, isn't it? Sometimes it isn't just one type of abuse. You might be dealing with several.
And you've got issues of like capacity here, haven't you? You know, and yeah.
And then we've got case study 3, the last case study, and it's about Leon. Leon is 39 years old and has a learning disability. He works on a farm. He lives in a leaking caravan, is not allowed to contact his family. He's paid £2.50 a week. What forms of abuse could Leon be experiencing? I'd just like to add them into the chat room. It is modern day slavery, well done. Yeah. We would like to think in our day and age that wouldn't go on, it wouldn't happen, but sadly it does. I think Gemma was referring on one of the slides about people having the money taken off them. It's a passport if somebody's maybe come into the country from a different country. So it is 100%, it is modern day slavery. again, there may be situations that you've maybe seen or heard about that you wouldn't be quite sure what to do about it, or whether to deal with it or refer it to somebody else. But if in doubt, as we said earlier, just contact somebody, just have a quick chat with them. Okay.
Yeah.
So well done on that.
And Hannah's, said there's financial a leak.
Yeah, well, sorry, who was it? Yeah, financial organisational neglect. Yes, because we talked, didn't we, about organisations? So
And you've got the physical concerns as well, haven't you, about his health?
And again, if whoever's running the place where he's living or running the farm, everybody's sort of going along with it, aren't they? Of what's happening. Yeah. So yeah, well done. Some really, really good chat that you put in there. So just moving forward, we've got just a few more sort of slides to go through with you. So who may have care and support needs? An adult who is elderly and frail due to ill health. They could have a physical disability or cognitive impairment. They could have a learning disability. They could have a physical disability or a sensory impairment. Has mental health needs, including dementia or a personality disorder. Has long-term illness condition. Could be misuse of substances or alcohol, a person seeking asylum and or a refugee, those who can't speak English, they don't speak English, individuals affected by a number of factors above. So the list is sort of like quite lengthy, but it could affect individuals, a couple of the different factors on there. Oh, sorry, it's me being clicky. Why can abuse happen? Sadly, we have intentional, non-intentional and deliberate acts of abuse. A lot of people, when they see non-intentional, they're not quite sure what that actually means, because everybody would say that abuse is deliberate or it is intentional. It can sometimes be that the person caring for somebody thinks they're doing the right thing, but in actual fact, they're maybe not equipped to look after the person that has a specific need. It could be shortage of staff if you're working within an organisation. I've spoken to quite a few people working in care homes, hospitals, domiciliary care, who they say that they'd like to take more time with everybody that they get to see, but unfortunately that doesn't always happen. There could be corners being cut and the carer's not coping. Poor management ethos, so greed, perception, power, control, colluding. So it could be that within an organisation, that they're not really that bothered about the clients that they're looking after. It's more about, taking money for the clients being in there. Lack of training, inexperience, with reduced confidence. So it could be that somebody's doing a caring role, for an example, but they haven't been trained sufficiently. Attitudes, lack of respect, normalising bad practice, boredom sometimes. Somebody's doing a job and they don't enjoy it and they don't like it. Attitudes and lack of respect is a massive thing, isn't it, when we're looking after anybody, particularly adults with different sort of issues that they present with, because everybody should be entitled to have respect and be treated with dignity. Why do we think there was an increased risk of abuse during the pandemic? Can anybody think why that would have been, why that would have happened? If you want to pop it in the chat, you can do.
Yeah, pop any answers in the chat, just so we just have a little kind of discussion around why at this time there may have been an increased. So we've got things like more people were at home, people were seen less, and isolation, Tricia.
Increased stress there as well, less oversight. A really good one there from Kate, services did not see individuals. I think that's such a very important one, isn't it? That, it's a lot of people haven't been able to go to appointments, which is true. Drinking alcohol rates rose. Yeah, that's a good one as well. Definitely with domestic abuse, so Shanna's put on there, people were locked in with the perpetrator or the abuser, which must have been awful for people in general, really. So yeah, I think the pandemics, there's a lot of things that we're still seeing maybe signs of, that people are still maybe recovering from, really.
Yeah, like somebody's put a lot of abuse and being alone. I think, it was a really difficult time for people, and people spent a lot more time alone and behind closed doors than they ever have, which, you know, naturally has increased concern and risks. And a carer breakdown, lack of support, a really good one, Peggy. And Anthony says missing family members, which again, you know, a lot of people are relying on their family support and their family networks and their community, and they were closed off to it, weren't they, essentially?
I think as well, for a lot of elderly people, I think, you know, they couldn't always understand the pandemic. I think that was awful, where they couldn't understand why maybe the families weren't being able to see them or check up on them and make sure they were all right. So yeah, really, really good input there. Thank you. So who can harm, and where do we think harm could take place? So if we have a look on the slide, it could be relatives and family members. It could be professional staff, it could be paid care workers or volunteers, vulnerable people, other service users, could be neighbours, friends and associates, or just people who deliberately abuse and that might not be known to the person. So what should we do if we suspect someone is being abused? We need to try and remain calm and not non-judgmental. I think the first thing, if somebody reveals something, I think it's that shock that we always present. We can't help ourselves really, but if somebody does disclose something to you, we want to remain calm. We can't make a judgment because we don't know the full facts really yet. Action any immediate safety or medical welfare of the adult if they need it. Ensure potential evidence has been preserved. Do not discourage further disclosure. All that means is if somebody's that ready and they're open and they want to talk, you know, let them, you know, get everything out. Use active listening, clarify the main facts and summarise what was said to you. And I think with that as well, it's really, really important that you capture exactly what somebody's saying to you rather than us sort of trying to like pad it out or add our view on it. We have to just literally take the facts down of what's being said to us. Give reassurance and do not press for more detail. We would never ask leading questions or make promises. And again, all that means is we wouldn't lead somebody down a path that we're trying to get information out of them. And we can't make any promises. And one big promise we could never make is that we couldn't disclose information. Because if it's of a harm to them or to somebody else, we have to disclose and we have to report. So we would retain, we would record and we would report the information. We would then inform the supervisor or a senior for support and advice urgently. If you're working within an organisation, every organisation should have their own safeguarding officer. It could be called something different to that, but it's normally somebody that's responsible for safeguarding within your settings. If it's within the community, what Gemma and I's role is at the moment is to encourage any voluntary groups as well to do the safeguard training, because at least then you've got an overview of what to do if somebody presented to you or they want to disclose something to you. Because Gemma, hopefully she'll agree, we've found within different groups, people may feel more comfortable talking to the group that they get to know or sharing information as they're going along, because they get to more on a friendly level rather than on a professional level, really.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And there's some really good things in the chat just before we move on to the next bit, just saying about getting the facts first and speaking to all those involved and evaluating the situation and gathering. There's some really good points. I think the only time that we would kind of discourage people from speaking to all parties is if you are really concerned that there has been a criminal activity, is that you are careful not to alert to any alleged perpetrator to the fact that, complaints being made. And you do leave that in the hands of whoever is the safeguarding lead, only because, it can impact on what they know about people and the disclosures being made. But yeah, some really good ones in the chat. So thank you there.
A really good point. And obviously, if you're not the person responsible for the safeguarding within your role, then it is definitely information's passed on. And we never discuss that information with another colleague either once that's been referred on. Because again, the person that's been sort of having that safeguarding concern raised, they're entitled to their own sort of privacy as regards to how it's going to be dealt with. So if the abuse is occurring, where can you go to get support? So we challenge it, but don't put yourself or others at risk. Ensure the safety of the victim, and quite rightly, as Gemma's just explained, the reason why. We would report to the manager or the CQC, which governs the care, organisations, that would only be if there'd been a very serious sort of allegation made and the manager felt that that was appropriate then to take that higher. Emergency services as required, or if they were required, hopefully that wouldn't happen in too many incidences, but they are also available. Hopefully everybody knows what whistleblowing is. If you don't, I'll just give a very brief description. Every company that I've worked for, they would have what we call a whistleblowing policy. And that is, if you see anything going on with colleagues that you work with or people that you know, we do have to call that out. And that is literally all whistleblowing means. You have got the right to report that and seek advice from, if it's your manager. If it was your manager that you were needing to have to whistleblow, then there would be somewhere else that you would go to, which will be on the end of the PowerPoint, that you could actually have a chat with. You know, because sometimes it could be somebody higher up that's the issue and you're a bit worried about reporting them or how you're going to get around it, really. So there is definitely another number for us to contact. So I won't read all the slide out, but the reporting pathways there. So immediate danger, we wouldn't mess about really. We'll contact the emergency services. It could be the police, ambulance or fire. If it was reporting abuse online, to the ERYC, Safeguarding Using Concern form. There is a website there. If you have a look, you can actually raise a form on there, and that'll talk you through what you've got to fill in. You have an out of hours emergency duty team as well. So if you just look underneath, that gives you Safeguarding Adults team, the contact number for them, and an email there. If a criminal assault has taken place, though, there are other agencies underneath, which Gemma might be able to give a little bit more information on. I know we've got the DVAP for social services as well on there. So that just shows you there's different people that you can actually contact if it's out of hours and you haven't got somebody that you want to, that you can talk to. And again on this slide, reporting concern for adults, you've got the East Riding of Yorkshire Safeguarding Adults team. There's a phone number there. It gives you Monday to Thursday 9 till 5, Friday 9 till 4:30. There's always an out of hours emergency duty team, which is really good. So their telephone numbers on there. And there is a consultation line for partners and professionals. So if you wanted to raise a concern and you weren't sure, you didn't feel that you were going to have to report it, you just wanted to run things past somebody, there is a line there that you can actually ring, and there's somebody at the other end of the phone that you can actually have that conversation with, which is really good. I'll pass back to Gemma, because Gemma's just going to talk you through the reporting the concerns for children and young people.
Thank you, Tricia. Yes, so we've included this slide because although the presentation is predominantly on adult safeguarding, generally we will always, wherever there is adults, there is children, and within our roles we may become concerned about a child or a family and not quite sure where we should refer it to. So children's safeguarding is kind of separated into two sections. You have your safeguarding hub and you have your early help and support hub. The safeguarding hub is if you have an immediate child protection concern. If you have witnessed something or you have somebody coming to you regarding a disclosure that suggests that child is at immediate risk or has been harmed, we wouldn't go through early help and support and assessment. We would refer that into the safeguarding hub. Here we are making a request for service, and what would come out of that is a consultation discussion, which would involve the relevant professionals, which are listed underneath there. You've got the social workers, your police, your health, education, those that are, you know, important in that child and family's life. And they are required within 24 hours to make a decision. Quite often that would be sooner, especially if they're really concerned about a child. Consent is ideally required, but obviously we're not always going to have a situation where maybe a child's made a disclosure or an allegation against a parent. We're not always going to get that parent agreeing to that involvement. Therefore, in that case, if it's agreed that that child is at risk, there would be no consent required. Now, your children's emergency duty team, they're contacted. The number is below. You have your standard team, which similar to adults is available between 8:30 and 5 on an evening. And then you have your children's emergency duty team for out of hours. So everything that's after 4:30 and until the next morning when the team opens. If you go on to the next slide, please, Tricia. So this is your early help hub. So this is where you may have a concern about a child or a family, but that wouldn't be considered non-urgent. So you're thinking about things where that family may need support with something. They may be struggling with something financially. It may be providing something for the children. There may be concerns that maybe a parent is struggling with the children. You know, we're not suggesting that the child's at immediate risk, but we know maybe mum is struggling and the family is struggling and they need that support. So this is where your support, the early help hub, as a mouthful, comes in with your non-urgent concerns. And this is when they look at the whole family support. So all the teams around the family that can provide intervention and hopefully support that family to address whatever that concern is at that time. What would normally be done is a request for service or early help assessment. So the early help assessment will look at what the concerns are, all the different factors around the child and the family, and look at where there's maybe need and what services can maybe provide or meet with that need. So again, the roles of the early hub there, it's a non-statutory, so the safeguarding is your more statutory, and its procedures and processes are directed by legislation around that, which is your Children Act. With your early help hub, you can make a referral and they're allowed a little bit longer. They can take up to 48 hours to come up with an outcome. And it offers effective support and guidance to parents, carers and professionals and those that are working with and around the family. So it may be agreed, for example, that there isn't the need for a social work response, the family doesn't need a social worker. However, maybe the family needs to work more closely with a children's centre or another team that's going to help them address whatever the concerns are. And with a referral to your early help hub, you do need consent. So no engagement and no referral can be taken, because we're not saying that this family meets this emergency response requirement, but what we're saying is we're directing them to the early help hub for support which they are consenting to. And that must come, as it says there, from the parent with responsibility. So if you're working with a child or young person and you think, do you know what they could do with that bit of support? I think I want to refer that in. You would just make sure that the family is happy for you to do that. And then the next slide, which I believe is on the domestic abuse. Thank you, Tricia, is if you are required. So if you are put in a situation where you're approached by somebody impacted domestic abuse, so that could be somebody who is alleging to be a victim of abuse, it could be somebody who wants to seek support for their behaviour, or it may be a child that has maybe witnessed abuse. The local East Riding service that would can provide that support is the Domestic Violence and Abuse Partnership, known as DVAP. And they have 3 strands to their service. They have the adult service, which is the adult victim service. So they support all those who present as a victim or survivor of domestic abuse, and they undertake risk assessments and individualised safety and support planning. So that aims to help with meeting whatever the risk level is of that person and any needs that they have, whether that be fleeing a situation where they no longer want to stay maybe in that relationship, or it could be that they need support to deal with historic, and they offer group programs which help them deal in the recovery from abuse. We also have the children's service. They work with children usually between the ages of 6 and 16. Obviously, there is, they do make sure that the child is mentally able to engage in that support. And that support is aimed at supporting children to, progress and move on from any abuse that they've witnessed. It helps to unpick any concerns or issues there is maybe about that child's understanding of what's a healthy relationship and what's an unhealthy relationship, and to make sure that they learn to live safely and be able to protect themselves. And then we have the Prevention of Domestic Abuse project, which ideally aims to support those who recognise that their behaviour may be abusive and would like support in order to address that. Victims you can refer to the East Riding. They do have the telephone number, which is there at the bottom, the 396368 number, to any of the services there. You can also refer online, so you could support if somebody was attending your organisation and required that support. They can go via the East Riding website's link. The link is there, and we will share this with you all, so you'll have those links. But if anybody was to go on the East Riding website, type in domestic abuse, there is a link on there that says refer self, but it is there. And yes, there is also a confidential advice and support line. The number is at the bottom. It's the 396330. So if you did need a bit of advice, or you just wanted to have an idea about what may be somebody's support options if they decided to leave, what support's in place, they can give you that advice and support over the phone to help you make an informed decision about, moving, maybe fleeing in a safe way, and whether somebody wants to move through with that. And the next slide, please, Tricia. I'll hand you back, and I'll mute myself so it doesn't do no feedback.
Okay. Check in, yeah. Okay. So what happens then? A senior person with understanding of safeguarding. So from the reporting, we're looking to ensure the safety of the individual adult at risk. We need to preserve evidence, consider consent, capacity, best interest, public interest, confidentiality and data protection. We apply the operational guidance, which means making decisions about safeguarding concerns, and then the safeguarding adults team. Accurate reporting and recording within 24 hours of a safeguarding issue being raised. They would then develop a protection plan and liaise with relevant agencies and your statutory regulator. So that's what's happening after the safeguarding concerns been raised. How could you make a difference, and what can we all do to prevent adult abuse? So if we just have a little look at the slide, we've got positive treatment of people, and making sure that people are treated with dignity and respect. We would want to be treated with respect and maintain our dignity. So that goes for any adult as well. How do you support the individuals to make choices and consent to treatment and support? We want to promote well-being and good knowledge of personal preferences. We want to encourage independence, choice and control wherever possible. Practice person-centred care definitely now, as with regards to adults, whether they have a learning difficulty, whether they maybe have dementia, Alzheimer's, or they're literally they're coping with a disability. It's all about that person. What are their needs? What do they want to see happen to them, really, as well? How do we care for them and make sure that they are being treated correctly? We want to prevent poor practice or abuse and neglect, and training, supervision and inspection. So dependent on your role, or if you work with an organisation, as I say, within the community or for the voluntary sector, training I think is really, really important, and the supervising of new staff, things like that as well, which we'll come on to in a minute when we talk about the safer recruitment. Criminal offences and adult safeguarding. It's just to say, sort of reiterate that everyone is entitled to the protection of the law and access to justice. Perpetrators will often seek out what appear to be vulnerable people. So sadly, we wouldn't expect to see it, but we do see it quite often, and that is what happens. People that are going to commit an offence, they are looking to sort of latch on to people that are definitely more vulnerable. We have county lines and cuckooing offences increasing. I'm not sure, some of you may be aware of county lines and cuckooing. If you are, please feel free to put your thoughts of that into the chat room. But county lines is just a massive police operation that it looks into drug trafficking and seeing how that enters in and around the East Riding, and they're trying to bring down the people that are obviously responsible for the trafficking of the drugs. County Lines is very much aimed at very vulnerable adults, especially adults with maybe learning disability, where they could be sort of brought into a situation involving drugs. Cuckooing offences is literally people that are trying to sort of sell drugs, trying to bring drugs into our areas, is to actually take over like a vulnerable person's home or a flat, and they will actually operate from that property. So the poor adult that's been sort of like taken over, if you will, they're very hard to sort of get somebody out of their property. And again, the police are under surveillance quite often, bringing down anybody, you know, that's perpetrating as regards to the cuckooing side of things as well. We have a coordinated response between the police, social care, health, the voluntary and community sector organisations is often required. So something as silly as, I don't know, you may see somebody that lives close to you that may be a vulnerable adult, and you've seen people coming and going, and you are slightly concerned, and you don't really know who they are. It's worth a phone call, you know, to maybe speak to the police and say, you know, that of what you've seen really. And again, when it comes to drugs and county lines, you know, that's a little bit more underhanded, but it could be something within the community. Somebody's talking about it, or they know of somebody that's been selling drugs. You know, it's some good thing for all of us to have our eyes and ears open as well, really. I'll just pass back to Gemma for the safer recruitment.
Thanks, Tricia. Yeah, so we've included this in because it's, you know, really important in terms of our groups and organisations, and looking at kind of why it is important. So we know that those who do want to kind of manipulate, exploit and access vulnerable groups of people, whether that be children, young people, older adults, those with, as Tricia said earlier, those with maybe a learning disability or something that makes them more vulnerable to manipulation. We do know that unfortunately those people will look to groups, organisations, community events, community halls, village halls, all of these venues, because they know that they are more likely to have contact with those vulnerable groups of people in those venues. So for me, it's our role within our organisations, within our groups, within our settings, to make sure that we make that really difficult for them. And there is a few things that we can do in order to prevent or deter them from maybe targeting our groups or our halls or our organisations, because we're making sure that it's very clear we're taking all the steps we can to protect the members that are attending. And things that we do include, you know, DBS check-in. If you've got somebody who is having regular contact with children, young people, vulnerable adults, you know, making sure, and they're having kind of contacts that's maybe not always in front of or with other people, that they are having the correct DBS checks undertaken. We do have a local contact named Rebecca Bull. For anybody who's not come across her, she is our regional DBS advisor. She is available on hand to answer any questions around whether a DBS is or isn't required, and what situations you would need to have a DBS in place. And she provides all her resources and her skills and her expertise completely free of charge. So again, if you would like her contact details, either pop it in the chat or pop me an email and I will send them across to you. She's a whole world of information and knowledge. It's really, really useful. References, we also recognise that it is really important where possible, if you can get recognises of somebody else, especially for our volunteers who have maybe volunteered and mentioned volunteering somewhere else. You know, if you can get a positive reference from another reputable group or organisation, you're going to feel a little bit more comfortable that you've done what you can to make sure that the right people are volunteering and a part of your organisation. Again, we've got an AirVast PowerPoint, and we do deliver some additional training on safer recruitment. So if that is something that you think your organisation or group would benefit from, again, my email is in the chat, so just get in touch with us. We do have a Keeping People Safe section on our website, which is a complete world of resources in terms of policies, procedures, training. And we also, if you do get an email from us or go on our website, you can sign up to our bulletin, and all our training and things will be sent out on that to keep you up to speed. And also about having a designated safeguarding lead, so somebody within your organisation that is responsible for keeping as far up to date as possible. It's such a big area, and no one person can stay completely on top of safeguarding. It's just impossible, because we live in an ever-changing environment and world, but somebody who does take responsibility for dealing with anything that comes in of a safeguarding nature. We, as Tricia said earlier in the session, we do provide that hands-on support in terms of you can pick us up on the phone whenever you need to just say, I've got this situation, do you think I should do something with this, or do you think we can be on hand to help and support with that? And even if we don't have the answer, we have links where we can go and find the answer for you. And then the next slide, please, Tricia. It's back to you. Oh, is it gone? Has it gone the wrong way? Policies and procedures. Oh, I've kind of gone over that. I'm ahead of myself. As I said earlier, we do have, and there is a link there which we can send you on the PowerPoint, which is a link to our Keeping People Safe section. So if you have particularly a new or recently set up group, there is various policies that we do have a policy template kit on our website, so you can access them. You can add in the relevant details of your organisation, and they provide you with a basis of the policies that you would require. And again, I think it's supposed to be policy toolkit, is all on our website. And if there's anything that you go on there and you're struggling to find, or you feel like you could do with a little bit more information, or even just to sit down, chat over coffee and talk about safeguarding within your organisation, again, just pop me an email. And the next one, please, Tricia. Prevent. So this is another piece of work that AirVast are working with the Community Safety Partnership in, and essentially what Prevent is about is safeguarding and supporting those who are vulnerable to radicalisation. If this is something that you're interested in, there is some really useful e-learnings on the Home Office website, which is there. Again, you can go on Google and find those if easier. And then also myself and Community Safety Partnerships Manager will be holding a Prevent Community Engagement event in Bridlington. I've popped the link there. You can find it on the Eventbrite website. But if any of you feel that you would like to learn a little bit more in that topic area, feel free to join us on that date. It'll be the 1st of December. And the next one, please, Tricia. So, is there any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or pop them in the chat if you would prefer. Is there any questions you've got? Do feel if it's something more personal that you would rather email us about, that is absolutely fine. You can contact us via the AirVast website as well. There's our email address and telephone numbers. But is there anything in the chat that you would like to ask, or does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask any questions? If not, there is some really useful websites, a lot of them of what we've referred to within our session today. Again, we will make sure, as long as we've got everybody's email addresses from completing the Eventbrite, we will be able to forward all these to you. with a huge thank you for joining us this evening, and which leads nicely into the thank you from myself and Trisha.
Thank you for everybody.
Yeah,
We're going to be on for another 5 or 10 minutes, so if anybody wants to stay on and they want to have a quick chat with us, then that's absolutely fine. And as Gemma said, thank you very much for your time.
I will stop the recording now, just in case anybody does want to chat with us off the recording. But thank you ever so much for joining us and, you know, giving up your time. And hopefully I will hear from some of you. Let me stop that recording.